Hello, Perform 360 Fundamental Challenges. My name is Ange from iPerformance Nutrition, and today I'm going to be talking you guys through some certain elements of your manual. But firstly, I wanted to say a big welcome to those of you guys who aren't already a part of our team. We welcome you openly into our community because we believe that our challenge is the gateway to having the intent to change. But it's not just about that, it's about building other friends and other family to support each other in your journey. And we hope the intent is to actually find you guys a way to get more than what you actually anticipated when you first joined up. So let's begin. We're going to walk through the fundamental challenge manual, and we're going to have a look at some key factors from a nutrition side of things that's going to help you thrive along your journey. The contents of your manual, if you haven't already seen them, is quite detailed. So what we want to do is just break down certain things over the course of our video content in order to give you guys little snippets of what you can achieve over the course of time, and also making sure that you guys can only listen or only want to listen to the things that are of importance to you. So in today's one, we're going to cover your daily nourishment plate, your post-training recovery nutrition plate, the plant-based plate, and also the portions for females and males. Okay, so to start with, you have this baseline level of nourishment. Now, we believe that although nutrition is a science, eating is actually a behavior. So the intent here is to go completely away from using numbers. Okay, I think we often get bogged down in the finer detail. We want a calorie count, we want to look at macros and portions in too much detail, and then we've lost sight of actually what will build the fundamentals of good health. So how we start is to say, okay, let's get the basics right first. Day to day, you want to be having a plate full of food. And what that plate needs to consist of is, the majority is vegetables or salad of some description. And within that group, we want it to be very colorful. So the more colors, the better, because the more access that you guys have to micronutrients. So you can see here that the purple section of your veggies is quite a large amount, makes up quite a large amount of the plate that you'll be eating. The second important thing is then to add protein to your meals. Now, protein, as an example, includes things such as fish, chicken, turkey, or any other animal-based proteins or flesh. Eggs, of course, are in that. And of course, if you aren't going to be following an animal-based meal plan in terms of protein, then you can also choose a vegetarian source of protein as well. So that all comes into the next category, and that should roughly take up about a quarter of your plate. So this, guys, is the next most important thing with anything that we're looking at. Because you guys are training consistently and there is an element of resistance within that, it's very important that our protein needs are actually slightly higher than the average or general population. So for us, protein becomes the second most important thing that you need to be putting on your plate. And that's the other thing that I want you to think about. So you build your plate by first starting with your vegetables and your salad. And for some of you, that might also include fruit as well, if you're not too keen on the veggies just yet. And then the next thing we look at is obviously the protein. So adding that protein in there as well. And lastly, you can see the fats column. So good fats we're talking about, so the things that are anti-inflammatory, the things that will make our brain function great, the things that will help with our joint health, and the things that will help digest and absorb our fat-soluble vitamins are things such as extra virgin olive oil, nuts and seeds in any description, some wonderful things like avocado, and then of course, even though things like cheese and maybe coconut or coconut oil is a saturated fat, it's still kept within the fats element. So we want to be maximizing the unsaturated fats, but of course we want to allow you guys to have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to building meals with taste. So things such as cheese or cream or dressings can definitely be factored into this plan as well. And you can see there that fats form a smaller section of the plate, but they still very much want to be present within what you're doing and how you're building your meals. The other thing to prominently see here is to have water or tea with minimal amount of milk or sugar for that matter as well within when you're eating your meals. So I think this is a big key factor in terms of hydration. Often we are told somewhere along the line that we shouldn't be consuming fluid with our meals, but we actually want you to use it as a primer to engage and get you to drink more fluid. Of course, we would love that to first and foremost be water, but you can of course cover that if you enjoy having things like tea or herbal tea as well. And water can also include mineral waters too. If you wanted to jazz it up, you can pop something like some squeezed lemon juice or lime or something like that in there. But it's definitely our intent to get you guys to drink either 1 to 2 glasses of water when you are actually consuming your meals. And it's really important from a hydration perspective that we do that, because when we have fluid with our food, there is a natural element of sodium and that helps to retain that water. So then that makes you more hydrated moving forward throughout the day. It also keeps you fuller for longer too. So this is our baseline plate, and this is what you'll fall back to consistently time after time. There is a couple of other notes on the bottom of this, and it's more so to do with intuitive or mindful eating. So we want to, number one, make sure that we're looking at the environment that we're consuming food in. Often too many of us really shovel our food, or we eat mindlessly. So we eat while we're distracted. We're looking at the TV, or we're at our work desk. We're looking at the computer. We never really engage with the act of chewing, swallowing, digesting, and actually eating and enjoying our food. So that's the first thing that we want to introduce. Now, an easy way to think about this is to slow your meals down. So if you think about how you consume food at the moment, the next time you have something, just observe your behaviors, your natural tendencies. Because more than not, most people will actually eat their food really, really quite quickly, and they'll continue to put in food even though they haven't finished their last mouthful. So what I would do is encourage you guys to put your fork and knife down after every mouthful, completely chew it, swallow it, have a sip of water, and then go back to taking the next one. And that in itself will definitely slow down your eating experience and give your body time to engage your stomach and the receptors around that, and then engage your brain to actually realize that you guys are full and satisfied from the food that you've eaten. The other thing that you won't notice on this plate is some form of starchy carbohydrates. So this is totally okay to have, but what we're trying to do is give you the basic blocks. So where we see carbohydrates having their best effect is in and around the meals around training. So we are trying to get you guys to think about building your plate from a perspective of going, well, what's going to make the most amount of difference? And the first thing that we know and have learned over the years of many years of doing these things is that most of us don't get enough vegetables and salad in our day. So the aim here is to start with that and then to complement that with the other food groups, the other macronutrients that are just as important, but we want to be starting with the veggies and salad first. So they are our highlight of our plate time and time again. And this might be a bit of a different concept for you. It might be something that's completely new and foreign, but I want you by the end of the challenge to be consuming on most days. We all know that no one's perfect, so it's totally okay not to do 100% of the plan 100% of the time. But by the end of the challenge, you want to be looking for ways in which you can get 5 serves of veggies or salad into your day and 2 serves of fruit. And this is a really big key factor because at the moment, population data will tell us that 4% of us in our general society are actually achieving that. And I want that number to change starting with you guys. So please, if this is one thing that you are struggling with, I'm going to give you some wonderful ideas about how to make veggies and salad taste good and how to make them, incorporate them into your day-to-day plan. But it's very much something that if you haven't got that basic right first, the rest won't really make too much of a difference. By doing this, we also increase our fiber content. And fiber, as we know now from a mental health and a mood state perspective, is one of the key things that's actually going to keep us thriving throughout life. So our gut microbiome is a really nice home for all the great gut bacteria that's going to help our immunity and also our brain function. So for us, we really want to have a lot more fiber within our diet. The Western diet has lent itself to being very highly processed. And along the course of that time, because a lot of the processing is being done for you in the way of refined foods that are packaged, they've added a whole stack of ingredients that is completely unnecessary. And so what you find there is a product that has really low fiber. And it's really easy for your body to take it in, chew it up, digest it, and it goes immediately into your cells. So we want to slow that process down by adding more fiber. And we talk about fiber as being two different sorts. There's soluble and insoluble fiber, and also resistant starch. Now, these are really important fibers that we want to be getting into our gut microbiome, because it's no good putting good probiotics in there unless they've got something to feed off. And probiotics actually need prebiotics. And we get that from food that is really high in fiber. So we want to be aiming for about 30 grams of fiber per day. And unfortunately, if you're not getting 5 serves of veggies or salad and 2 serves of fruit, you are not going to hit that marker by any means. So starchy carbohydrate definitely has a warrant, but it's also then looking at how your body is best going to absorb those nutrients and how best we can complement your training. So we've put that in and around training. We always want you guys to think about how food is processed, but also then choose foods that are actually whole. And what we mean by whole foods is pretty much they come as they are. If you are to look at an ingredients list on a packet of products, what you're looking for is an ingredients list of 4 things or less. Anytime you have a really long ingredient list on a product or a package, you'll notice that it will obviously be a little bit more refined than something else. So really look for foods that don't necessarily contain packaging. So we want to reduce the plastic, of course, but also looking what happens in the processing of that. Then, of course, if something's packeted and it has a really long ingredients list, it's not the type of food that we want to be choosing. And lastly, we're going to use our hands to determine our perfect portions, but we will get to that in a few moments. So this is your baseline nourishment, the plate that you will come back to time and time again. If we have a look now, this is our post-training recovery nutrition plate. So as you can see here, we have now added an element of starchy carbohydrate. We have also made an allowance for fruit. And I think particularly if you're looking at your training session, fruit becomes a wonderful source of carbohydrate just before a session. So if you're training first thing in the morning, say the 6 a.m.ers out there, and you've come off not having anything, obviously being fasted overnight, I really want you guys to actually get in a piece of fruit 15 to 30 minutes prior to you starting that session. So what that carbohydrate will provide from fruit is something that will give your body a bit of a primer. It'll send a neural signal from your brain, so from your taste buds right through up into your brain, and actually say, you know what, I've got energy available. And that's going to become particularly important in the higher intensity sections of your workout, like the finishes. So you'll notice that if you don't have anything before training, you might find by the end of the session, you're really flagging in the finishes. Try to have a piece of fruit, as I mentioned, 15 to 30 minutes before, depending on how your body digests food. But if you have that in there, just see and notice how your training is affected. And I can guarantee from past experience that things that require you to have a higher heart rate are very much enhanced by having carbohydrate on board. And that's just simply a physiological system, how our body utilizes energy. In a time where we don't have a lot of oxygen to burn fat, we really rely on carbohydrate. And if we don't have that carbohydrate there, we tend not to be able to perform. Now remember guys, if you can perform more, better, harder, faster within an exercise session, you are going to naturally burn more energy. So over the course of time, how we see things is that if we focus on improving our performance, getting fitter, getting better, getting stronger, then we essentially burn more calories within the exercise session, which creates the deficit that we want. Because then if your fat loss is a goal for you, then your deficit is coming from your energy output as opposed to restricting food. So this is where we look at food to complement what you're doing. And if you add things like carbohydrate in and around your session, then you will start to see your performance shine. So I would encourage you guys to have fruit and of particular ease of digestion, things like a banana, so a ladyfinger banana, or a fresh date, one of those little fresh mature dates, just they have pips in them, so make sure you take the pip out. That sort of type of fruit, 15 to 30 minutes before, is going to sit really well in your gut. It's going to give you enough time to sort of process and digest that, and for that to come out into your bloodstream and for your muscles to absorb that and then use that for work. So the veggies in the salad is still there. As you can see, it formulates a really big part still of your plate, but it's just slightly less than the day-to-day baseline nourishment plate. So once again, there's a big focus here on having as much color as possible. So making sure you're eating across the food group board with all your vegetables. You don't just have to have white or just green. In fact, I really encourage you to get colors in there. And then of course your protein is definitely in there as well. But here you can see it occupies just a little bit larger amount of the plate. And it's still coming from the sources that we mentioned before. Now, here's where your starchy carbohydrates play a really good role. So particularly when we're looking at the meal after your training session, things such as oats, potato, rice, pasta, or bread, in fact, are really beneficial to have after you've done a workout. So what you effectively deplete within a workout is your glycogen levels. Now, we can store carbohydrate in our muscles and in our liver. We can't store protein. And if we overeat on any one of those macronutrients, whether it be protein, carb, or fat, if we're having too many calories in general for our body, we will eventually store that as body fat. So it's not the case of going, okay, let's take a whole food group out because we know that that's going to get us leaner. In fact, when we remove carbohydrates, we generally notice a drop on the scales. If we have a think about why, for every 1 gram of carbohydrate you eat, it actually stores with 3 grams of water. So what happens when you first take or remove carbohydrates, or the majority of carbohydrates out of your diet, is that you notice a big weight drop simply because you're just not holding as much fluid when you're having those foods. So don't be fooled to think that that's actually a drop in body fat. And that's the biggest thing, which I would have explained to many of you over the course of taking your weight on a really frequent basis. It doesn't really tell us anything except for how much fluid or maybe how much food you've had over the course of time if you're doing the weighing too frequently. Your weight could be fluctuating from morning to night, 2 to 3 kilos. Okay, so essentially body fat needs time to be put on and also time to get rid of as well. So I would never look at a weight change or a weight fluctuation as being a true indication of losing body fat unless you're looking at a time point about 4 weeks away. So don't be concerned with carbohydrate. But what I want you to think about is the good types of carbohydrate that you want to be replenishing what you've burnt in terms of your glycogen stores after you've trained. So if, for instance, you are training early in the mornings, then your breakfast would make your post-training recovery meal. And things like porridge or rolled oats or a bircher muesli would be ideal. You could have some eggs on some toast. And in saying that, we want to be once again going for those whole grains, those foods that are minimally processed. So anytime that you can see a loaf of bread that what I like to term is like a brick, so if you knocked on it, it wouldn't squish all the way down, it tells me it's got lots of nutrients in it and lots of fiber. So don't be afraid of bread unless you're a celiac and you can't digest wheat. And there are versions of gluten-free breads out there. But how I would choose bread is to look at what the nutrient density of that is. And if you can see those whole grains or seeds that they've put in there, then that's the best type of bread to be choosing. Often if you go to a bakery of some description, an artisan bakery, or just pick up one at the markets, you'll find a whole host of varieties of bread that is not at all like the ones that you get in the supermarket. So keep an eye out for those types of carbohydrates that we're referring to, the ones that are higher in fiber. When rice and pasta are concerned, it's the ones that are wholemeal or whole grain or browned, for instance. Pasta itself has come a long way over the years as well. So we have things like pulse pasta, which have a higher percentage of being based on a legume, which is also wonderful and a great source of fiber as well. Now, don't be afraid of things like potatoes. We want to also include those in our starchy carbohydrate list, but as you can see, they are a vegetable, but because of the resistant starch contained in them, we consider them as a starchy carbohydrate. So the best thing I can say about potatoes, and this is white potato or sweet potato, is to make sure you keep the skin on the outside, and because a lot of that is all the micronutrients that are contained in the skin itself. So hopefully this will give you an idea of how to build a meal after training. Now, if, for instance, you're training mid-morning, then your post-training meal will become lunchtime. And then, of course, if you're training in the afternoons and nights, your dinner will become your post-training recovery meal. So remembering that that starchy carbohydrate can move itself all the way through your day. I had a really good question when I was having a chat to most of you, and maybe you train at night or in the evenings, but you like to have some starchy carbohydrates as a breakfast. And that's totally fine to do. So this is just a guideline. What we want to be maximizing is, yes, the ability for your body to take in carbohydrate, store it, utilize it, recover from the training session. So it is best in and around the meal before and after training. But if you prefer to have, say, rolled oats for breakfast or some muesli for breakfast, then they are totally wonderfully fine foods. Unfortunately, they don't particularly follow the general baseline nourishment plate, but it's totally fine to do that. So I would look at reducing possibly the amount of starchy carbohydrate you might be consuming, making sure you're getting some protein in that breakfast meal. So say, for instance, something like a high protein yogurt can go with those rolled oats. And then possibly, if you're not going to be adding vegetables in there, that you could choose fruit instead. And that's where I can bend the rules a little bit, guys. I really want you to be focusing on getting those vegetables and the fruit count in. So it's totally fine for you to do that if you wanted to, and you're really comfortable doing that, and you enjoy that meal for breakfast. Just remember that even though you're training outside of that time, you can still put that starchy carbohydrate in there. But as you can see, it's in a smaller amount compared to your protein and your vegetables. So just keep that in mind as you start to build your good nutrition through your day. And remember, there is not too many rules we like to stick to. We always encourage you to make it your own. So have a feel, have a go, and then, okay, get some feedback. See, how did that work for me? Say, for instance, you're not training on a day. So for most of you, you're training maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and on all other days, you're possibly not going to be training. Well, that's totally fine. And if you still wanted to have carbohydrates in your meals, we can definitely do that. It's just thinking about the amount and where that is. So with carbohydrates, I typically like to front end them in the first half of your day, because often we've got lots to do. Our brain is functioning, we're walking around, we're moving around. So if you wanted to still maintain starchy carbohydrates within your day-to-day meal plan, even though you're not training, I would front end them and maybe look at putting them into breakfast and lunch, and then abstaining from them in the evening when you just don't need that carbohydrate available. So the tips here is always to think about what you can do within what you're already doing and how you can improve what you're already doing. Once again, eating a variety of colorful vegetables, but now also thinking about how we're going to include those 2 pieces of fruit and where they best fit within your meal plan. And then, of course, always going back to choosing those whole foods with minimal processing and packaging and a really short ingredients list. So we're going to then move now into how to use your hands as a guide for how much of those food groups that we want to be having on our plate. But just before I do that, I wanted to cover the person that doesn't want to eat animal-based flesh or protein within their meal plan. And this might not be anyone that wants to classify themselves as solely vegetarian or vegan. It could even be a really great thing for most of you guys to do, to have maybe a couple of days in the week where you don't have animal meat. So this is really something that I think people have enjoyed adopting. It's a different way to look at things, but it's also making sure that we're still hitting our protein needs and getting all that nutrition in to support our training. So it's what we call the plant-based plate. And it has a little different section in it because, of course, when we start to eat a little bit more from a plant-based style of food, then our fiber automatically goes up. And of course, within that, our absorption of the nutrients goes down just slightly. So it's actually okay for us to eat slightly more and for it to be a little bit more balanced day to day between our plates. So instead of following a baseline nourishment plate or a post-training nutrition recovery plate, your plant-based plate just follows every single meal that you would have over the course of the day. It still includes a really nice array and amount of vegetables or salad, but you can see here it covers half the plate. And then it allows for a quarter of the protein coming from a plant-based source, which will include things like beans, legumes, tofu, tempeh, and lupin. Now we have a wonderful ability within lupin flakes to add these into our cooking and to boost our protein up. And of course, now we see that starchy carbohydrate forms a part of the plate as well. And these are our whole grains, but we also have to remember that our starchy carbohydrates aren't 100% carb. They actually have elements of protein in them. So say, for instance, we take something like quinoa, and quinoa is a grain and it is considered under our terms as a carbohydrate, but it actually is a higher protein grain than, say, rice, for instance. So when we combine your plant-based proteins with a starchy carbohydrate, we actually get what we call a full spectrum of amino acids. And so there are certain key essential amino acids that we need to get from our diet because our body can't assimilate them. And so when we start combining plant-based proteins with grains, we start to get a nice broad spectrum and we actually fulfill that need entirely. So you don't have to have animal-based food or flesh within your protein amounts in terms of what you're choosing. But if you don't, then you need to put a little bit more thought into how you're representing the other areas of the plate that will still hit that protein need for you. And of course, your fats are in there as well. So once again, making sure that we've got an element of that, whether it's used in our cooking or just on top of our meals as a dressing. It's also very important to remember to represent that on your plate and in your meals. We definitely want to encourage your water or your herbal tea most of the time, or your mostly black teas and coffees within that as well. So once again, there's an element there to have that when you're having your meals. But then we add fruit into this as well. Now, this might not form a part of your plate, but it could be used for a snack somewhere else during or in between meals or during the day. And then, of course, it's really valuable if you pop that in just before or just prior to training. So we always come back to that mindfulness about eating, making sure that we're stopping when we're reasonably about 80% full. We don't have to actually achieve complete fullness in order to stop eating. So that's a really good, valuable thing to do. Once you build your plates, have a look at what that looks like. Go through, do the eating experience. But if you find, and we get this a lot, when you start to increase your fiber and your vegetable count within your plate, often we can't finish what's on there. So rather than force yourself through because you think that you need all of that, it's important that we do get those nutrients in there, but it's okay not to eat it all at once. You might want to stop and then maybe an hour or two later, go back to finishing that meal that you created. So that's entirely appropriate. The other thing that we need to be mindful of when we're looking at plant-based eating is a few key micronutrients, and particularly B12 and vitamin D. So for us to get a little bit more vitamin D exposure, we live in a wonderful state that has lots of sun. So I would encourage you guys to, once you've got your meals ready, then to actually think about where you're eating those meals. So particularly a lunchtime meal, if you're out and about in the sunshine, the direct sunlight, and you expose your limbs and your face to sunlight, so within the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., you're going to get a natural source of vitamin D exposure from the sun. So try, and I encourage you, and it's also great to get a different environment as well with your eating, is to go outside the office and actually eat outside. B12 is another element of concern if you're going to solely go with a plant-based diet. So B12 is often found in things like egg yolk and obviously meat and animal-based products. So if you're not going to be consuming those things, then I would definitely think or look towards having a B12 supplement if it's necessary. There are some sort of plant-based sources of B12, things like nutritional yeast. So you might want to have a look at enhancing your meals with a couple of those different factors. Now, with everything, what we want to do is, of course, choose whole foods that are minimally processed. And I encourage you to think about other things, because there's definitely some plant-based proteins out there that are quite processed. And by which those I mean things like corn mince, so Quorn, corn mince, and also a lot of the bean-based patties might have a little bit more of the ingredients that we don't necessarily need. So where you can, always try and make food from scratch, from your recipes, and try and cook, get back into the kitchen. But I understand that from a convenience perspective, we also need to have things that are available as well. So just be mindful when you are choosing plant-based sources of proteins that they aren't always going to be 100% healthy for us. They can also be processed as well. So try to choose less of those packaged options as well. Okay, so let's move forward and talk about exact portions and how to build that plate. So as we've gone on over the years, we have definitely evolved in terms of how we've prescribed food. We started quite very precise, and over time we found that people got too anxious, too stressed about it, and so we moved away a little bit more from exact amounts, exact counting, exact looking at recording food, because of course we don't eat numbers. And that's a novel concept. We actually eat food. But not only that, the energy balance equation is probably a little bit more complex than what we just believe as energy in equals energy out. It actually involves things like how we digest and, in fact, how we absorb food. So when we're looking at portions, we came to a decision that everything that we were trying to do was actually directionally proportional to your hands. So if we have a look at the food groups, we are now going to give you a guide as to which food groups are going to be what size with your hand. And then the easy part of this is that you can actually take that guide wherever you go. So it's really hard if you're weighing things and measuring exact portions to then go and have a meal out. Or if you forget your scales for one reason or another, if you run out of batteries, how do you then build a plate that you know is going to meet your needs? And this is where our hand portions come in. So it's a perfect tool for actually accurately measuring what you need. And it gives away all that stress and that anxiety when you're looking at calorie counting. So the first thing we look at is protein. So if you look at the palm of your hand right now, I want you to trace the inside circle of that palm. Now this is going to be your protein amount. And from a perspective of size, it also wants to be the same size thickness as well. So look at the thickness of your hand, look at your hand portion. Now, I always say that when you look at either your partners or your friends or your child, their needs are directly proportional to their hands. So when you start to realize that your hands might possibly be smaller or bigger than somebody else's, then now you start to realize you're eating for you as an individual. And it's okay to have the same protein for every member of the family, but you have to be aware of how much you're consuming needs to reflect your hand size. So that's your protein amount. The next amount we're looking at is your serving of vegetables or fruit. So if you clench your fist, and roughly it's about 1 cup thereabouts of raw salad or vegetable, or 1 medium-sized piece of fruit. And that's the amount that we're looking at for a vegetable serve or a fruit serve. Now, if you cup your hand and you place a cooked form of carbohydrate, starchy carbohydrate, on top of that cupped hand, it should fit in there and not spill over. And that's your amount of starchy carbohydrate. Now, of course, everyone's needs are going to be different here, because whilst your protein stays the same and your vegetables and your fruit count stay the same day to day, it is your starchy carbohydrate that will fluctuate depending on your training volume. So this is the carb, this is the amount that's going to be increased or upscaled if you train more, and of course reduced if you don't train as much. And that's the idea behind a post-training or training plate versus a baseline nourishment plate. And this is of course going to be individual. So it's going to depend on what your energy and your performance in the gym tells you. It will also depend on just your pure happiness. So I think often we move away from this notion of going, hey, you know what? I actually really enjoy eating these foods, and that's totally okay to do as well. So that needs to play in terms of your preference of what you choose to eat as well. The other thing that we're looking at in terms of fulfilling the needs on your plate is your fat serve. So your fat serve is the size of your thumb. So right through to your big knuckle, all the way to the top of that thumbnail. And that's your fat serve. So remembering again, everyone, is that your hands go with you. They are directly proportional to your needs. Now you've got a concept of what macronutrient size that you're after. And now you know how to build that plate with those things in mind. Your goals are also another important factor. So when we're looking at total volume of eating, it's important to understand, well, what do you want to achieve out of this 8 weeks? Are you geared towards a fat loss or a body composition change? And so if you're looking at increasing your activity, like I said, don't think that you need to reduce all your food. In fact, you might have to increase some elements of your nutrition in order to achieve your performance goals, to create the deficit that you need to lose body fat. But the idea with the portion of protein is that you're getting enough building blocks to not lose your muscle. And that is a really big key factor when we're looking at body recomposition. So having your muscle mass there keeps your resting metabolic rate high, but also then doing resistance training makes you less likely that you're going to lose muscle over time. Now, muscle is an active tissue at rest, and so it burns calories just by being there. And so what we always want to have in the back of our mind is to go, well, we don't want to just lose weight as such. We don't want to lose water weight. We actually want to lose fat mass, and we want to actually hold our muscle while we're losing body fat at the same time. So the portion plate and the portion amounts are exactly designed to help you achieve that. So irrespective of this moment in time, all I want you to focus on is go, what's my goal and what am I looking at with my plate? And give it a go. Because if you don't try, then you don't know what to change in time. And if you preempt things that go wrong, they might not actually go wrong. So what I find a lot of the time is that, well, people will come in and they'll say, oh, well, what if I'm not going to get enough carbohydrate because I'm going to take that out of my day? And I said, well, your body will tell you if you're not getting enough carbohydrate. So remembering as well that vegetables and fruit do contain carbohydrate. It's just that the starchy carbohydrate, so the higher proportion of carbohydrate-based foods, aren't going to be consumed a lot when you're not training. But just give it a whirl and see what happens. And if you find that you're missing them or you need them, then add them back in. So we can always have a reference to popping your questions on the forum. I'm always available for explaining things in a little bit more detail if you've got a specific question. And you can also ask your coaches. They are wonderful sources of knowledge and they can definitely put you on the right track. No question is a silly question. And I think I really encourage you all to have a think about what you're doing. Run it by a friend or a family member. Get another opinion about it, but then of course come back and ask your community, the community that has done this time and time again, and we can give you a really rational, quick answer to get you to where you need to go. So that's your portions. I wanted to just quickly show you within the manual what that looks like on a plate and how many portions exactly that you will need if you're a female versus a male. So your female portions are of course on the left-hand side and the male portions are on the right-hand side. So when we're looking at protein and building your plate, females, we need 1 palm-sized serve of protein, and that can be a cooked or a raw weight. I don't really want you guys to think about the small, minute detail. It's just whatever you've done. So if you've cooked up a whole lot of chicken and you go, oh goodness, I didn't look at the amount, then that's okay. You can still do the palm of your hand as the amount. Or if you wanted to think about a raw weight, then look at a raw weight. That's totally fine. Now, males need 2 palm servings of protein for their plate. Of course, males are higher in terms of muscle mass, just genetically, so their needs are slightly elevated. And then because of that, they also have a higher work output, and they are generally just bigger in structure. So that's the reason why males have 2 serves of palms of protein and females have 1. The next thing we look at is the vegetables count. So this is a salad or vegetable count, and remembering our fist size is going to determine, or 1 cup is going to determine how much of that we have on our plate. For females, it's 1, and for males, it's 2. Now remember, over the course of the day, I would like you to aim for having 5 serves of vegetables or salad. So if it means that you are slightly eating more than that, then that's great. But if you are under that, then you can actually add, for females, you can add more to your plate. Because what I want you to think about is you also don't need to just eat from that plate. You can deconstruct your meal a little bit and say snack on something like some carrot sticks in the day or some cherry tomatoes. And that might contribute to that total 5 amounts or 5 servings of vegetables or salad every day. Guys get a little bit more buffer, but of course your fists are going to be bigger. So you'll probably find that that will be easily achieved, but I also want to make sure that it's totally represented in every main meal that you have. And like I said, if breakfast is going to be a little bit lighter on the vegetables or the salads, you can definitely have a fruit serve in there. Your starchy carbohydrate comes in next. So for males, that is 2 cupped handfuls of starch carbohydrate. And for females, that's 1. Now, as an example there, they've obviously gone and used fruit. So we know that fruit is a form of carbohydrate, but you could use anything of your grains. And also, if you can't tolerate wheat, then you can also use a gluten-free source of carbohydrate as well. And then your thumb-sized serving of fat is the other thing that's on the plate. So if you think about things like your seeds or your nuts, for instance, this example has some almonds, you can see the amount and how that is represented on your plate. For females, that is 1 thumb, and for males, that is 2 thumbs. So that's how you build your plate. But I'm now going to tell you that you need to aim to achieve 4 of those plates every single day. And this is where most of us go, oh, I don't really do that. I don't eat 4 meals, or I don't have time to sit down and eat 4 meals a day. So if we think about what our culture has normally done and what's traditional, breakfast, lunch, and dinner is probably quite fine. Now with that 4th plate, you can deconstruct that plate. So you can break up those elements and have them as snacks throughout the day in between breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that's how you can make those 4 plates, or represent those 4 plates day in, day out. Now remembering that 2 of those will probably contain more of the starchy carbohydrate, and then 2 of them will be a little bit more on the higher fat, higher protein, and less starchy carb. So if you think about that, try to choose 2 of those plates with carbohydrate, 2 of them without the starchy carbohydrate, and then spread that out through your day as it fits your schedule. There is no research to tell us that you have to eat in a certain way that's better than one other. If you are doing something, say for instance, abstaining from food for a certain amount of time, so you're practicing something like intermittent fasting, that is totally okay to do. You just have to, within your eating window, be mindful that that's the amount of nutrition that we're wanting to be getting into your day-to-day plan. So think about what you're doing currently. Think about how it's logistically going to work with you day to day, but you can definitely aim to achieve breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then of course split that 4th meal up into snacks. So if you think about the protein group, you might want to have a high protein yogurt, or you might want to snack on something like some beef jerky. That might be your snack serving of protein. Your fats are quite easy to get in if you think about maybe popping some avocado on, say, a cracker. So your cracker can be your carbohydrate amount. Or you could have things like seeds and nuts, which are really easy to get into the diet as well. Or you could have something like a piece of cheese, so anything like that would be absolutely fine. And then of course you're having your veggies or salad or fruit if you can't get those 2 in. So cutting up those carrot sticks, having the cherry tomatoes, snacking on some snow peas, or just having, like I said, a fresh piece of fruit is totally fine to have as a snack option, but it formulates part of that plate. Now the other thing I want to stress is don't stress. So what we need to think about is just go, look, if you don't get entirely 100% portions on that plate, then what can you do next time you eat to make up for it? I feel like most of us, if we fail at one meal in the day, we tend to fall off the bandwagon and we go, oh, it's all too much, and then we'll just go back on tomorrow. We'll start afresh tomorrow. But you haven't failed at anything yet. We make so many decisions when it comes to food and health over the course of our day. If you make one decision, or say for instance, you don't even make that decision, the decision was made for you, you ended up at a lunch place where you thought you could get a nice balanced meal, and then in fact it turned out to be something completely different, well, what are you going to do? Okay, you can still have the meal, but then the next time you eat, you might say, look, that's probably more protein than probably what I needed, so I'm going to cut back my protein a little bit. Or it's probably way more fat than I would have normally put on my plate, so I'm going to cut my fat back next time. Or it wasn't enough vegetables or salad. So how about I choose to have a handful of celery or something like that? So you can always make a better decision moving forward, even though the last meal that you had might not have been great. Stop beating yourself up over things that aren't perfect. We all know in life that nothing is ever perfect. But if you go back to those solid foundations, if you think about where's my veggies and salad from first? Where is my protein next? Have I got some really good fats in there? You've pretty much done most of what's going to get you the maximal result from a body composition perspective, but also from a health and a performance perspective. The other thing you add to that is to say, okay, am I training? Where's my starchy carb? And remember, if you miss it one day, have a reflection on how that worked for you. If it doesn't work, then change it up. But I often say to people, don't preempt anything, don't fix what ain't broken. So where you find yourself in a problem or dilemma, then do something different. So I really want to simplify everything for you all. I think it's very important for you to understand that it doesn't have to be entirely 100% and perfect. And I hope you appreciate that too. So that's it, guys. We're going to cover the Simple 6 in our next video blog, but I'm going to leave you to digest all of that, and I will join you back when we discuss the Simple 6 in our next video blog. Good luck.